Well, as far as the history of the field is concerned, I think it probably started off in seriously in about the 1970s, 1980s. And I think in the early years it was driven mainly by people who were interested in companion animals. So there was a lot of research on cats and dogs, for example, particularly dogs. I mean, quite a substantial amount of research has been on dogs. I think during the late 80s and into the 90s, it became a much wider field when the agricultural people got involved in it, and they started looking a bit more from the perspective of the animal, whereas what the companion animal researchers had done was to look particularly from the point of view of the human owners rather than the animals. And of course in the agricultural industry it's more than looking at just the welfare of the animal or the effect that it has on their behaviour. There are economic reasons for doing this stuff, you know, the yields of milk, the yields of eggs and so forth can be affected by the way that animals have a relationship with the person that looks after them. Around about the same time there was the beginning of some interest in laboratory animals and the sorts of dilemmas that laboratory technicians that looked after lab animals were going through when animals had to be euthanized, for example, or when they were being used for experiments, and the sorts of ways that that relationship between the keeper and the animal started to build up, and the consequences of that for both of them. And recently we've got more interested, I think probably just in about the last 10 years or so, we've got more interested in how this applies to the zoo setting. And really, for me at any rate, that's grown out of an interest in looking at how unfamiliar people in the zoo, that is people that the animals are not familiar with, that they don't know, the zoo go in public, how they can affect the behaviour of the animals. And we started doing that back in the 80s because we were interested in looking to see behavioural biology really done in the zoo, in animals that to do any worthwhile work in the field would have been very, very expensive and very, very difficult. So you can do a certain amount of behavioural research quite well in the zoo. But then it dawns on you that all these people are coming in every day. They're bound to be affecting the animals in some way, and we wanted to try and find out how that was happening and what effect that had. So it worked out from that really, because it started to become apparent that the relationships that the animals in the zoo might have with their keepers is going to be very different from the relationship they have with members of the public that just come in and don't have any repeat sort of interactions with those animals. So it was a matter then of looking to see how those two things interact. And to my mind, one of the most exciting developments in the future in this field will be to take that forward and look to see how the interactions that zoo animals have with their keepers leads to better welfare and better job satisfaction for the animals and for the keepers, but also to see whether that spills over and has any effect on the way that the animal sees strangers coming into the zoo, and whether that can in a way try and ameliorate the stressful effect that zoo visitors have.
And I think the other area that certainly human-animal interactions and anthrozoology is really good for is trying to provide evidence to support the ways in which animals are in service to people already. There is a real need to bridge the gap between practice and what we know has an impact on either people or animals. And so certainly, you know, everyone would want dogs to go into hospitals if we believed it truly did, you know, reduce trauma, increase speed of recovery, and there's a variety of things that have been seen. What we also want to make sure of is that the dogs being used are being used well, so the handlers know what they're looking for to look for certain traits of stress or essentially fatigue. And so emotional fatigue, which is something that we expect humans can have, is also something that we're now seeing that animals can have that are in these service occupations as well.